Hi, everyone. Today we are going to be starting our World War I topic inside our power unit. So before we can get into the actual fighting and everything that was going on during World War I, we have to figure out what happened, how we got to that point. So we're going to be taking some notes today on the post-World War I era and see what happened, what was going on in the years after World War I that may have led or paved the path for World War II. Okay, so we're going to be going over this PowerPoint today together, and you're going to be taking some notes. And it's these post-World War I notes that are here in Wednesday's post on Canvas. So you click on that, you'll open up a set of notes that looks like this, and this is word for word the same as the information that we're going over on the PowerPoint. So all you need to do is follow along and replace those blanks with the words that should be there. Okay. So here we go. Post-World War I. So immediately following the First World War, one of the biggest problems that countries were facing was unemployment, because you had a lot of soldiers that were all of a sudden returning from the war, and there weren't any jobs for them. The country needed to be rebuilt. A lot of jobs were destroyed because of the war, and all of a sudden you have thousands of more people that need jobs. So there were a lot of people that were without jobs for quite some time after World War I. A lot of countries also owed a lot of money to others because they had to borrow money to help pay for the war. The United States is one of the countries that people borrowed money from. So there are a lot of countries that owed the United States money following the First World War. One thing we didn't really get into a whole lot, I mentioned it, but we didn't get into too much detail about it, was that Russia did not actually finish out World War I. In 1917, the same year that the United States joined World War I, Russia actually left because they fell into a civil war. And when that civil war ended, a communist government actually had taken over. And because of the rise of communism in Russia, that made a lot of people in Europe kind of afraid that communism was going to spread to their countries as well. And that's going to play a big part in some people coming to power. Some of the people that you talked or that you read about or watched a video on yesterday, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini really used this fear of communism to rise to power. And outside of these countries, Europe really lacked strong leadership. France's leader has now changed, and he's not the strongest leader in the world. Same thing with Great Britain. They'll get some pretty powerful or pretty strong leaders here soon, but at this point, they're not quite there yet. The world also was looking for a way to make sure that they kept the peace. And so a lot of countries signed what was known as the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928. And this is basically an agreement that all countries would avoid going to war at all costs. That this was not an instrument of national policy, that if there was disputes between two countries, they would figure out a way to solve those disputes without going to war. Unfortunately, there was no real way to enforce the Kellogg-Briand Pact. The League of Nations, who would kind of have been their job to do it, they were more or less powerless at this time because the United States did not join. We learned about that prior to our election unit, where the United States never signed the Treaty of Versailles, therefore never joining the League of Nations, and that really hurt the power of the League. Fast forward a couple of years, Japan decides to kind of disregard what the Kellogg-Briand Pact had established, and they invade a section of China known as Manchuria. And this is in like northeastern China. You can see the Korean peninsula right here. Japan would be like right in this area here. They invade Manchuria. They take it over. The League of Nations, who was supposed to be enforcing the Kellogg-Briand Pact, they were too weak, didn't have the power to do anything about this. At this moment, I want you guys to pause the video and ask yourself, why would Japan want to invade Manchuria? Because tomorrow in class, we're going to be talking about that. And I want to see what kind of ideas that you guys have come up with. So pause the video and think about this question. Okay, hopefully you had some time to consider that, and we're moving on. So eventually, even though Europe was really struggling because of the debts the countries faced and the unemployment that was ravaging Europe, they did start to make a shaky recovery. It was slow. It was a little unsure, but it was coming along eventually. Economies, they eventually returned to the level of manufacturing and trade that they had prior to World War I, meaning their factories were being rebuilt. The relationships were being rebuilt. Veterans of the war were slowly finding jobs. And there actually ended up being a lot of extra money to go around, especially in the United States, for middle-class families to start buying some items that used to be kind of looked down as luxury items, like cars, refrigerators, and radios. The U.S. really emerged from the war as the leading economic power in the world. A lot of this is because a lot of European countries had borrowed money from the United States. And so the American banks really controlled the global economy because a lot of countries owed them money. And a lot of this money and these investments from American banks is what was paying for the recovery in Europe. So you can kind of see how all of these countries are related. And as the United States begins to improve, England and France, who are borrowing money from the United States, begins to improve. Germany's coming along a little bit slower, but they're making their way up there as well. There were some problems with the post-war economy, though. One of those was overproduction. When all these people started buying things like refrigerators and cars, the companies that made those started to produce more and more of them with the hope that they were going to sell more cars and more refrigerators. But eventually, when people buy them, right, they don't need another one. Like most families didn't need 2 cars. Most families didn't need 2 refrigerators. So people stopped buying cars and refrigerators because they already had one, but the companies began to, or kept making them at the same pace. So all of a sudden, these companies have a lot of extra cars, a lot of extra refrigerators, radios, whatever the product was, just sitting around. And so the factories weren't making as much money anymore. You also had the stock market crash in 1929. A lot of people in the United States had bought stock on margin, which means that they actually borrowed money in order to invest it. And when the brokers asked for that money back, right, the brokers called these loans back. A lot of the people who borrowed money, they couldn't pay them back. And that's caused people to panic. And that's what caused the stock market to crash. And because of the crash, American banks were devastated. So they turned to Europe, the countries that they had loaned money to, and told them, we're done making loans to you, and we want you to pay back the loans that we have given you. A lot of European countries couldn't do this, not in full anyways. So American banks closed because they ran out of money. American businesses closed because they ran out of money. That caused people to lose their jobs. And when people don't have jobs, they don't have money to go and buy things. And so more companies were not making money and they were forced to close, which caused more unemployment. So it was this vicious cycle of unemployment, right? Meaning nobody's buying products, which means factories have to close, which causes unemployment. And it was just this vicious cycle that kept getting worse and worse. And you can see after 1929, what really happens to the economies of the countries, the United States, England, France, and Germany, and how that correlates with the popularity of the Nazi Party. Because extreme situations, right, like a Great Depression, right, the misery and hopelessness that comes from these situations, causes people to look for new solutions. And a lot of these times, these solutions can be radical. And that can cause radical people, extremists, to gain more popularity and rise to power. For example, this is how Adolf Hitler will eventually come to power in Germany. All right, you see the cyan color, right? How the popularity of the Nazi Party, which Hitler was a part of, skyrockets after 1929. Okay. He used a very specific strategy in order to rise to power. And not only him, but yesterday you guys learned about a guy named Joseph Stalin, who was in the Soviet Union, formerly known as Russia. And then you also learned about Benito Mussolini, who was very similar to Hitler in Italy. But a cult of personality is when a country's regime or sometimes an individual will use certain techniques to rise to power. Techniques like using the mass media, propaganda, the big lie, which we'll get into a little bit more tomorrow, the spectacle, the arts, patriotism, government organized demonstrations and rallies, right? And they use these things to create this idealized, heroic image of a leader, right? Almost to a point where they are almost worshiping this person. Okay, and this cult of personality can be used by evil men, like we'll see with Hitler. There are going to be other people that have some positive effects on the world, like Mahatma Gandhi, who uses the same type of strategy. So it can be used for positive, but it can be used for negative as well. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at a song here titled "The Cult of Personality," back from the 1980s, and we're going to analyze the lyrics of this song, and see what that song says, and kind of get to know what a cult of personality does and why it appeals to so many people. If you have questions on this, make sure that you message me or email me.